Thank you, everyone. I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is the June 8th, 2021 CDRB meeting. Staff, if you want to go ahead and do the roll call.
Thank you. Chair Zagorsek.
Here.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here.
Member Cook.
Here.
Member Jordan.
Here.
And Member Pina.
Here.
Great. All members present. We will proceed to the next agenda item, which is the pledge. If we could all stand and pledge. Flag.
United States of America. And to the republic which stands, one nation
Under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for that. We do have our agenda, but I will ask before we start if anyone has anything to add to the agenda at this time. If not,
I do not, and I will make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is adopted. Are there, I don't believe we've received any minutes from previous meetings, so there won't be a motion to adopt any previous minutes at this time, unless I'm incorrect. Okay. So we'll proceed to our main and single agenda item, which is the with matters to the zoning updates. I'll hand it over to staff, but Sandra did inform me that there's multiple items to cover. So Sandra will be covering the update process, the objectives of the update, and then the new code structure, at which time we'll be reviewing the major changes, not the entire document. So thank you for highlighting those major changes because it is a very extensive document. And that will be done by consultant Bob Brown. Thank you. And then there'll be a specific format that we'll go through in terms of asking clarifying questions at that time, which I'll go through the details that Sandra shared at this point. So unless there's anything else, we'll pass it on to Sandra and staff to kick us off.
All right. Good evening, board. We have a PowerPoint that we'd like to share. Dan, let's start that. All right, next slide. The next slide shows the agenda for this evening, touched upon by Chair Zagorsek, and staff will give a presentation on the Zoto update process that we've been going through over the last couple of years and what we still need to take us to the finish line. We'll go through the objectives of this update, the structure of the new code, and those major changes that were just mentioned. After each of those major changes, the ZDRB will have a chance to ask clarifying questions of staff to get any greater in-depth items that may be desired at that time. We will then read all of the public comments that we've received into the record, and this is important because there may be something that you will want to comment on when it comes back to you for discussion. And then we're going to move by chapter review, and we're seeking the board's feedback as well. If there are any changes that you'd like to make, we want to see if there's a consensus that we can take on to the town council when we bring it before them. Then we'll do one last public comment in case something comes in during the meeting so that you have the benefit of hearing that, receive final feedback, and then we'll share with you our hoped for next steps. Next slide, please. So as you know, we've been engaged in this Zoto update for some time now. We completed phase 1 in April of last year, and those were the revisions that were necessary to implement the general plan. And those were the change areas. You can see some of those on the map here. It was the rezoning of the 2 parcels on Humboldt. It was the establishment of the mixed-use overlay on North Washington, and some of the changes to the primary commercial zone on the west side of the street. We had to do all of those changes and the associated changes first because we needed to bring the zoning and design ordinances into compliance with the general plan. We now find ourselves in phase 2, and this is a more comprehensive effort. We really wanted to take a look at as many chapters of the ZODO as we could because it was last comprehensively updated in '92. We know that there were some inconsistencies in the code. There are some omissions. There's just a lot we wanted to achieve with this update. And this update is broken into 2 parts. Part A that you see tonight and Part B that will come before you in July. So tonight we'll be looking at the agricultural and the residential zoning districts. We'll look at the residential design standards, and we'll touch upon affordable housing, parking, tree preservation, and home occupations. Next month, we'll shift more to a commercial focus and go through the remaining commercial districts that weren't updated as part of phase 1. We'll look at commercial design standards and really wrap up with the regulatory chapters and definitions that impact the whole code. Next slide, please. In terms of a timeline, you have Part A before you tonight, and it will go before the town council on July 20th for a public hearing where they will receive your feedback. Then we'll see Part 2 before the ZDRB next month at the July 13th meeting. We'll take those comments to the council on August 3rd, and then we'll bring back both A and B to the council on September 7th. What we hope for as adoption, but this schedule is subject to change if necessary. So the ZODO update process has been overseen by the ZODO Ad Hoc Committee, and that is a 4-person committee comprised of 2 members of the Town Council and 2 members of the ZDRB, with Mayor Dunbar, Vice Mayor Dorman, ZDRB Vice Chair Miller, and Member Cook. And at the completion of this, we will have had 11 meetings, but we've completed 10 of those so far since this phase began in November of 2020. And for each of the changes that are shown in these chapters, they've been back before the ZODO committee 2 or 3 different times for review and additional feedback as we've attempted to bring as final a version to you as possible so we could really have something solid to work on tonight. So the updates of this project are pretty extensive. What we are hoping to do, and we have worked toward, is to consolidate Title 17, which is zoning, and Title 18, which is the design ordinance. And this is important because provisions are found in so many different areas that you have to skip between different chapters with the hopes of identifying everything that you're looking for. And by bringing them all together, we're hoping to make a one-stop shop for somebody who's researching the code and wanting to understand zoning and design standards. We'll be consolidating and updating all definitions and all findings, and these are scattered again throughout the code, which makes it somewhat difficult, and we hope that this will really lead to an ease of use of the code. This update, it updates the design criteria into different objective and subjective standards, and this is something that we'll spend quite some time going through tonight because it's something new and different. We are standardizing the format of the zoning district and regulatory chapters where it just simply lacks that right now. And we're using tables to organize zoning standards for ease of use. Again, this is important because you used to have to go to so many different chapters to find what you were looking for, and this puts it all in one place. And then lastly, we're updating procedures and regulations that reflect changes in state law, and that relates to the design standards and guidelines, as well as staff practices in applying the code. So because we have looked at so many different chapters and doing such a comprehensive update, it has resulted in a new structure where we have different divisions by subject matter. And what you see highlighted here are the chapters that are before you tonight. Division 2 is all about the zoning districts, the allowable uses, and these design standards. So tonight we're looking at the agricultural and residential districts, and then also the overlay districts for affordable housing and the senior mobile home park. What you don't see highlighted here are those commercial districts, and those are the ones you'll see next month. Division 3 relates to general development standards, and these are things that apply to all properties in town. And it includes such things as floor area ratio or FAR, setbacks, open space, and tonight we'll be looking at parking and tree preservation. In Division 4, we have consolidated standards for specific land uses and activities. And these are things that may apply to a project or not. They're not universal like the Division 3 development standards. Say if somebody wanted to construct an ADU or some other items. And tonight we'll be looking at affordable housing and home occupations. And Division 5 is the permit process and administration. And this includes all of the regulatory chapters that will be back before you next month, as well as definitions. And that pretty much covers the new structure of the code, which we find much more well thought out and organized. And we hope you find so too once we jump into this. And I think with the next slide, we move on to the major changes. And so I will now turn it over to Bob Brown, who has been helping us with this process. He has been instrumental in sharing his expertise and helping us bring it to this level, to this stage for you tonight.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Can everyone hear me? Is this good?
Yes.
Okay. First, before I start, I just really want to add my shout out to the Zoto ad hoc committee members, Miller and Cook. This has been a very heavy lift assignment. We had over 25 hours of meetings with the ad hoc committee and staff. And I think the committee members probably had at least twice that number of hours in preparing for those meetings. They looked over 200 pages of the zoning code, and literally word for word. And as Sandra said, more than once, at least 2 times. So I would suggest if this wasn't a virtual meeting, I think at some point you probably owe your colleagues a glass of wine or a beer after the meeting because of all the dedication. It's really been a great process to have them involved.
I would second that, just the comment after seeing that there were 11 meetings, multiple hours, and seeing the extensive revision of all the document is, I would like to, I'm not making a motion, but I would like to point out that much appreciated and incredibly thorough. And it's really amazing and grateful to see us get to this point. And from just to reiterate the process point that Sandra pointed out, that for the rest of us, Bob will go through each item, each of the, I believe, 10 or 11 proposed changes. We can then ask clarifying questions of Bob before he goes on to the next one, just to go back and forth. And it's really after that point that we'll receive any public comment. And then if should there be any changes, we would propose them after the public comment. So I just wanted to let the other members of the board be aware that this is the process. So sorry, Bob, thank you.
No, thank you, Chair Zagorczyk. I would like to point out that I'm going to go through these major changes, we call them, that were recommended by staff in the subcommittee. These summaries are very brief, but you have the full underlined strikeout version in your packets that show all the changes and all the rationale for those changes. So after each chapter, feel free to ask clarifying questions, not just about what you see on the screen, but if you identified anything else in your packet in this particular chapter, go ahead and ask questions. So let's start with the Ag District. There aren't a lot of existing development regulations in the Ag District, so we filled in some of those gaps. And most importantly, we realize that the floor area ratio, the FAR limit, only applies to enclosed occupied structures. So on your ag parcels, if there are any large auxiliary structures such as barns or feed sheds or processing buildings that are not fully enclosed and occupiable, they would not be subject to any size limits. So what we've recommended is a lot coverage limit of 5% that would apply to all structures, both occupied and unoccupied. We're also proposing a 2,000 square foot limit on the size of individual ag auxiliary structures. Those would be exempt from design review, but there's a provision that larger ag auxiliary structures could be allowed by going through design review. And we also increased the permitted height limit of the auxiliary structures from 15 to 20 feet, as long as they are more than 100 feet from a public roadway and at least 20 feet from a side or rear property line. Questions about the ag district?
Any questions about this from, as I don't anticipate questions from anyone who wants on the board who wants to ask a question, go ahead and do so. I do have a question. So the 5% of total structures. So my understanding is that the minimum lot size for agriculture is 10 acres. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the 5% would be essentially half an acre, which would be the equivalent of 20,000 feet. So in this case, it would be a maximum of, say, on a 10-acre lot, 10 structures of no larger than 2,000 square feet each. Is that a fair interpretation of how this would work?
I think the math works, right?
Okay, understood. Yeah, and the auxiliary structures themselves would have to be, as you pointed out, closed structures, presumably relevant to the operation of the agricultural parcel or district.
Yes, that's what they're defined as, being incidental and for agricultural use. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. It's kind of hard to read eyes here on Zoom, but if there's no other questions, we can go on to the next.
Thank you. Yes, let's go ahead.
So when we got into the ag district, that brought us to chicken keeping. We proposed to modify the existing regulations to limit the number of chickens on an ag site, because when you apply the existing regulations, one of your ag sites is about 30,000 square feet, and so you end up with a lot of chickens. So we're proposing that on the ag parcels, the limitation be 1 chicken per 1,000 square feet of site area. We also added a prohibition on chicken-related production facilities, and we would allow egg sales with a home occupation permit. Any chicken questions?
Once. Okay. No questions. Thank you.
I was afraid there was going to be a crossing the road question, but good. So next is beekeeping. Chicken keeping led us into beekeeping. Currently, the town has no regulations or allowances for beekeeping. So we've added some, recommending some fairly basic limits on the number of hives allowed, requiring setbacks for hive location, and also requiring a solid fence between the hive and an adjacent property so that the bees then, their flight path is directed upwards. We also require fresh water and hive maintenance. And, as with chicken egg sales, honey sales would be possible with a home occupation permit.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Member Pina.
So I'm thinking of one property in particular, which is across from the French Laundry, and there are no fences on that property. And I don't believe there's any, well, there may be fresh water there. It's just not apparent that it's there. How does that affect a situation like that?
Sandra, I assume that's a legal non-conforming.
Yeah, so that is a commercially zoned parcel. So these are legal non-conforming, and so they'd be permitted to be continued in their current condition and not held to these new standards.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions. We'll go on to the residential districts. And actually, there are not a ton of changes here other than a lot of reformatting and putting regulations in tables, et cetera. The big change, though, is that the subcommittee proposes that duplexes be an allowed use in the RS single-family district. The mayor and the ad hoc committee are pretty convinced that the state is going to mandate this soon anyway. And it's not particularly likely that many properties would have the ability or necessarily the interest in taking advantage of either renovating or rebuilding to a duplex structure. Also, in all the residential districts, we're recommending adding beekeeping, since we now have those regulations, and also deleting the use categories of employee housing and agriculture in the residential districts. Any questions?
Just curious what the rationale was on the third point of deleting agriculture, employee housing as allowed uses.
Agriculture, again, can be pretty intensive if you're really into production agriculture. This obviously would not affect people's growing gardens or fruit trees or anything like that. But if that was the principal use of a single family property, that would not be allowed.
I see. So it's not, it's the specifically that for it would be employee housing for whatever that property would entail.
The employee housing was the provision in the current code, and Sandra can remind me, I believe that was anticipating maybe some of the local businesses housing employees. That frankly is allowed without having a separate use category. If, for example, a local restaurant wanted to purchase a home and allow a group of unrelated employees to reside there, they have that right to do so under state law. So we didn't really feel it was necessary to have this use category in the code.
Understood. It was duplicative and redundant. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, keep going. Thank you.
The next couple will go quickly because, again, in the mixed residential, same things. We added beekeeping, deleted agriculture as a principal use, and employee housing.
I'll assume no questions. We'll keep going.
And you'll see the same thing here with the H district, the Old Town district, the same use changes.
Thank you.
And master plan residential, we added beekeeping. We didn't have employee housing there before.
Okay.
All right, mobile home park, some changes here. Most of the permitting for mobile home parks is preempted by state law. It's under the Department of Housing and Community Development. But we wanted to call out that other structures, such as common facilities or perimeter walls, are the purview of city permits. So we specifically call out that those need design review and a use permit. Also, this district referred to a senior mobile home park overlay to add age restrictions. But there was no such overlay district ever created in the code. So we're adding this new overlay district, and then we'll make the associated changes on the zoning maps to the two parks that have the senior requirement.
Assuming no questions. Thank you.
Okay, so residential design standards and guidelines. Sandra touched on this, and we are updating these criteria that are in Title 18 now. That was a very significant effort, and it was mostly in response to new state laws that require multi-unit residential projects to be evaluated only based on objective standards. And since most design criteria are inherently subjective, we had to do some heavy editing so that we could either quantify or make them objective as design standards. The ones that remain subjective, we have designated as design guidelines. So multi-unit residential projects would be evaluated using design standards only, but applications that would involve, let's say, an individual single-family home would be considered under both the objective design standards and the subjective design guidelines, if that makes sense. And it's important to note that projects that can't or choose not to comply with the design standards, they have an out. They could apply for design review to approve an alternate solution, which then allows your full range of discretionary review authority. You aren't just constrained to objective standards if they choose to apply for design review to get around one of those standards. So to make the design standards and guidelines easier to use, we've broken them out by topic, such as subdivisions and street frontage, building scale and massing, roof forms, etc. And those are all in your packet. There's a lot of the design standards and guidelines. So at this point, I'll just open it up for questions that you may have about any of those.
Any questions? I'll start with one question. This strikes me as predominantly central to the reorganization of the zoning document, where, as Sandra was indicating, that they were fairly scattered. So would you say that this summarizes one of the many significant efforts to create a set of documents that were much easier to scan and navigate?
Absolutely. But still, again, even though they were scattered, we had to do some pretty heavy editing, again, to try to remove as much of the subjectivity as possible and make them objective. And then we added a number of standards as well when there were areas that maybe weren't covered well by some of the existing design criteria.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Just to clarify, are we going to be going through the design review standards and guidelines directly, or is this the only opportunity for people to ask questions?
We have them available to bring up on the screen if there are, if you'd like to go through specific ones or
Okay.
walk through them all, we can do that. If not, we were just going to respond to questions. But you're right, there's a lot there. I will say it was very handy having Vice Chair Miller on the group too, given his expertise.
Yes, and as you mentioned, it's much easier to read through the unredacted copy at the bottom of the attachment. It's very clear now what we were aiming.
Right. We were working so long in track changes that really it became hard to know what we were actually writing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, all right. Then next week, and again, we can come back to any of these if you choose later. Okay, affordable housing. So this is challenging, and it's somewhat challenging to present because this was the subject of part of 3 of our meetings to understand and edit the affordable housing requirements. So a 5-minute summary is going to be a bit convoluted, but we'll try. So the affordable housing regulations consist of 3 sections currently. The first is the town's inclusionary requirements. So that's when you have new housing projects that are required to provide a certain number and type of deed restricted affordable units. The second section is the state's density bonus provisions, and those allow residential projects additional density and zoning waivers in exchange for providing a percentage of affordable units. And then the third section is the town's density bonus provisions, which give the council the ability to grant an additional density bonus for incorporating a higher percentage of affordable units. So let's start first with the inclusionary requirements. The subcommittee recommends that when affordable rental units are provided by the applicant, that they be affordable to either very low or low income households and not moderate income. Currently, it's a 3-way split between those 3 income categories. And they're suggesting that we eliminate moderate category for rental units because market rate rentals today are rented essentially at levels that are affordable to moderate income. So you're really not gaining much by creating those deed restricted affordable moderate income units. And also, it's very, very challenging for the town or any jurisdiction to meet the low and very low income units that are required by your RENA allocation. And so again, focusing more on getting those types of units will be much more valuable to the town in complying with state law. We also propose to increase the required period of affordability of the affordable units. This is called for in the general plan. And so the idea is to increase the affordability term on ownership units from 30 to 45 years and on rental units from 30 to 55 years. And I think that's mostly because it's pretty astounding how quickly 30 years goes by. And then all of a sudden these units drop out of the available affordable housing pool. In the second section, the state density bonus, since the state is changing and monkeying around with that legislation almost annually, we suggest deleting the attempt to repeat the state requirements in the town's code because it's just too challenging to keep current. We would suggest we just cite state law and then retain the sections that relate to application requirements and review. And lastly, the subcommittee concluded that the town's density bonus, which is called for in the housing element and was created because of that, that can be granted along with the state density bonus. And when you do so cumulatively, the subcommittee concluded that it resulted in excessive density that would likely not be compatible and is also not really generating sufficient numbers of affordable units to make that trade-off worthwhile. So let's take a walk through some of those calculations, and I'll try to show you the committee's rationale. We go to the next slide, Daniel. Okay, so this first slide shows what the changes were made in the last legislative session regarding the density bonus provided under state law. So before, the maximum density bonus you could get was a 35% bump in density. Now the state has increased that to at least 50%. And in the case of projects that provide 100% of the units for low income, the state offers an 80% bonus. So those bonuses have jumped pretty considerably. Next slide. This shows the town's density bonus formula. So projects that provide at least 25% low and very low income units would get 100% density bonus. And this would go up all the way to potentially 150% density bonus. So let's try to apply these to some theoretical projects. Next slide. So the subcommittee asked us to give them some examples of a 2-acre site. Let's say it's zoned RM, so you can get up to 10 units per acre. So a project maximizing at 20 units. And this particular project is proposing to meet the minimum 15% town inclusionary requirement. So that means out of the 20 units, they would provide 3 that would be affordable, 1 very low, 1 low, and 1 moderate under the current formula. So that original project is 20 units. The state density bonus would kick in because it would look at the number of very low income units that are being provided. It's 5%. So the state would grant a 20% density bonus automatically. So that's 4 units. The town density bonus wouldn't be applicable because it requires that you have at least 25% very low and low income units. And in this case, they only have 10%. So there's nothing there. So this project, which started out at 20 units, now becomes 24 units. And again, 3 affordable. Next slide. Before I go on, does that make sense to folks, the calculations? Okay. So the second example is you have a developer that wants to propose a quarter of the units as low income units. So that would be 5 low income units being proposed. And again, you have the original base project of 20, 5 of those being affordable. The state density bonus kicks in and it would allow 10 bonus units for that 25% low income. And then the town density bonus can be applied and it grants 100% density bonus. So now you have a cumulative 30 bonus units on top of the original 20. So your project is now 50 units in size. So you went from 10 units per acre up to 25 units per acre. And you still only have those 5 low-income units. Because under the state density bonus law and under the town density bonus, those bonus units can be market rate. So it's quite a bonus. And then next slide. Let's say you have a nonprofit affordable housing developer that comes in. They want to do all affordable units. They're all low income. So in that case, they are proposing 20, all 20 would be low income. The state density bonus kicks in, but it does require that the bonus units be low income as well. So you've got 36 low income units now. The state density bonus was 16. The town density bonus now goes up to 150%. So there's 30 bonus units. So now this project is 66 units, 33 units an acre. And you have about half, about 36 are low income units. So let's take a look at the next slide, which tries to do a comparison between different ways of approaching these regulations. So the one in blue on the upper left, those were the calculations I just went through, both for the second example of 25% low income units, and the third example, the 100% low income units. So again, the 2 bonuses are additive. If you, however, calculated them separately, that's the red table there. So in other words, the state density bonus would be based upon the affordable units that are originally proposed, but to get the town density bonus, the applicant would have to provide additional affordable units. You couldn't just count the ones that were used in the state calculation. So what that shows is that in comparison, running the same calculations, you get more affordable units out of this deal, but it doesn't reduce the overall density very much. In the first example, you still end up with 50 units. In the second example, you have 6 fewer units, but still quite a big bump from the original 20 units that would normally be allowed by zoning. And then the third option down in orange is, what if you gave the applicant the option of not both density bonuses, but one or the other, their choice. And in both cases, looking at the examples, the town density bonus is more generous than the state. But of course, if you only get one of the 2 density bonuses, it reduces the total number of units. And so that's what the subcommittee has recommended. Again, the town may revisit all this when you do your next housing element, depending upon how the numbers are looking. But at least for the interim, the subcommittee felt that this was a quick fix and would at least make the density increase somewhat more likely to be compatible with your lower density surroundings. With that, I will stop and see if that made sense.
Bob or Sandra, can you remind everybody what the numbers were on the, what are the ones that are across the street from Town Hall? It's like 25 units on
almost 2 acres. So that's the Arroyo Grande that's associated with the Bardessono Hotel.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? I do have one question, but I want to make sure if anyone has, they can go first. Okay. I did have one question. It was, I think it was a comment, Bob, that you made in terms of to what degree do the density bonuses actually conform to the design standards? So in the scenario where you have I believe a 2 acre lot with 66 units, is that even possible with respect to the design standards? Like, imagine there's a ceiling.
Yeah, the development regulations would probably be a problem. And we talked about this at the ad hoc committee meeting level, because more than anything, the floor area ratio is going to be a constraint. To get that number of units with the existing FAR, probably it's probably impossible. The units would be so small, they wouldn't be practical. However, the state anticipates all that. And the state density bonus law gives applicants the ability, and in fact, the right to waive some of your zoning requirements if they can't get that number of units in. So if the height limit is a constraint, or setbacks are a constraint, or the FAR is a constraint, they can request waivers or concessions to those regulations. So again, the applicant really is very much in the driver's seat on these projects that contain a number of affordable units.
But that would then apply to the state guidelines, not the town guidelines, right?
Yes, although Sandra and I have had that discussion, and I'm pretty certain the town attorney would agree that even if we give this either or option, that the town density bonus, while it might limit the total number of bonus units, because again, the town is being more generous here than the state, you really could not take away allowances that are in state law. So for example, the waivers and concessions. So there still has to be that ability for the applicants to use that part of the state law.
Got it. And I think an acre is what, about 40,000 square feet?
43,560.
43. I'll round it down to 43 and do my calculator math here. So at 86,000 square feet for 2-acre lot, 66 units would be 1,300. You'd have to divide it into, it wouldn't be 1,300 parcels, but you'd essentially be building more of an apartment complex type thing for that to work.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Let me jump into with a clarification to Member Cook's question. I looked it up. Arroyo Grande has 1.25 acres, so at the 25 units, it averages 20 units an acre.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting benchmark. So I guess I would say that the only comment here, and we can talk about it later, but the parting comment is the degree to which the density bonuses exceed what the town ordinances are, to a point where they're untenable. And if there's language that acknowledges that, then it feels sustainable. But without that, it could be misleading. That would be my only comment.
Yeah, again, the applicants really pretty much have the upper hand here. I would say that the one area where the town might have some flexibility is for arguing for smaller size units. So if someone came in with a density bonus proposal and had 3,000 square foot units and a 6-story building, I think the town would be within its legal rights to really push down the size of those units to something that's livable but by no means excessive, to try to keep the square footage and height of these buildings down.
And sort of asked such a basic question, but I figured I would just double check for myself and maybe anyone else who's watching. So in the example of the base project being 20 units, where 5 units would be low income, right? So a quarter of them. With the density bonus being 50 units, I'm talking about the blue section.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those 50 units would still be low income? Would it still just be the 5?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, like I say, not a great trade.
Okay. Okay. Those are all my comments and questions.
Okay. All right, then we can go on, Dan. So one more section. This is home occupations. I think you're probably very familiar. So we're proposing to split home occupations a little more finely into 3 classes: minor, moderate, and major. And the main difference between the 3 is the level of client visitation that's allowed. So under minor, it would be a maximum of 1 client a day. For moderate, up to 3 a day. And more than 3 would go into the major category. And major home occupations can also have up to 1 employee on site at any time. So minor and moderate home occs would be staff approved with an administrative use permit, while majors would be required to be reviewed by the board. We've also modified the list of allowable and prohibitive uses. It was kind of an exhaustive list, but it didn't really contain possibly everything. So the allowed uses are now in more generalized categories, such as personal services or art and craft work. And these are defined terms in the code with a lot of examples after each. And we added homemade food operations as an allowed use, but we precluded on-site meal service because we didn't want to have home occupations turn into a de facto restaurant. We also add an allowance for minor retail sales of products that are used in the home occupation, such as, let's say, a hairstylist that can sell you the beauty care products that they use. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Any questions on this?
Other than to say, aren't you glad that I was on the Zoto committee? Because otherwise I would have a million questions. And I did have a million questions by being on the committee, but right now I'm good with it all.
We're glad for multiple reasons.
We are very grateful.
Thank you.
There was not a rock that was not turned over.
That we have no doubt, and again, to the betterment of this result. So appreciated both on the before and the after side of the equation. I did have one clarifying. So home occupation. So this would be any residential, and this is presumably expected to better delineate between something like, you know, residential scaled retail versus, you know, residential with elements of business. So it's designed to prevent a home by turning into a de facto retail location, but also acknowledging that you may choose to work from your home to a degree.
Sure, but there are other prohibited uses, you know, things like, you know, running an auto repair shop out of your garage, or you know, building cabinetry, you know, those kinds of heavier uses that just would not be compatible in a single family neighborhood.
Understood. And the sign, was that new, or was there always a guidance around having a sign for the home occupied?
It was always in there. However, it was in the sign ordinance rather than this chapter, and it was part of the effort to consolidate all subject matter into one place.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you. Assume there's no other questions.
Trees, don't we? So one more section.
Is there?
Tree preservation.
Oh,
I'm not sure. I think there is.
There is. Do we? I don't think I made a slide for that, did I? Oops.
It's not next. Nope.
No, it's not. My apologies. Okay. So in tree.
It popped out at me. Sorry
Well,
about that.
No. Thank you.
I'll say if you don't print the document, then it'll definitely be tree preservation. But that's
right. On the fly, let me try to remember what we did with trees. I know that previously the definition of trees that are to be protected was included in a definition, and now we pulled that out as an applicability section.
I believe it's page 59 in the for those of you following.
In the clean version, I think it's page 27, but
okay,
depending upon your version. I know we changed the findings for tree permits. Sandra, what else do we do? Oh,
we added some exemptions to the tree removal permit because we were running into some situations when a public utility wanted to take out a tree, or there was really, it was creating a problem for a property owner based on a water or sewer line. And then we also incorporated the staff practice of requiring payment of an in lieu fee at time of permit issuance when a replacement tree is required, and that is refundable upon replanting the tree and providing proof, because it made it easier to track the replacement trees and put the burden on a property owner if they did indeed want to plant that tree.
I think we also modified one of the exemptions that allows staff to waive the need for a tree removal permit for trees that are dying or diseased. The current regulations sort of speak to a tree expert finding the tree in imminent danger, and that's been challenging for them to establish that definitively or say that. So the language has been broadened a bit, talking about, you know, that it is in the near term threatens health, safety, property improvements, et cetera. So that was refined a bit.
And the last item that comes to mind is that there was a very extensive recommended tree list, both California natives and other trees. Right. And we will reference those, but we're going to pull those out and add them to a pamphlet that we can provide to the public. We'll have that available online, but it's not necessary to keep it in the code.
I think that was like 10 or 12 pages of your code were lists of
huge.
A very nice list of trees.
That makes sense. I'm just curious, in the spirit of thoroughness, for the fee follow-up, what determines the fee? Have you determined a fee schedule or pricing?
The in lieu fees are included in the town's master fee schedule, and that's updated annually based on the cost of living index, or I'm not sure that's the right term, but some inflationary figure. And we have the small, medium, large, and then heritage tree in lieu fees. So those 4 categories, and that's what's required. And it may be that based on the size of a tree being removed, that it requires 1 or more replacement trees or combination thereof, whichever is easiest for really a homeowner to achieve if they want a combination of planting some on site and paying the in lieu fee, because the goal is really to get the inch by inch replacement value based on DBH.
Thank you. That makes sense.
So now we're done with the major changes.
And the reason that one came to mind was because a public comment that came in. So when we move to that section, I'll read the one email we've received.
Well, that's actually
no.
a good segue. If there are any other questions, well, did a new public comment? Actually, no. Let's go to the public comment. I think this one.
So I did email it to you this afternoon. It was received late afternoon, but I do want to read it into the public record so that those watching can hear the comments. And then if there are any questions or you want clarification from staff, we can go into that.
Okay, if there's no other questions of the major changes, why don't we go through the public comment?
All right, this was received from Pam Reeves. It says, in section 17.40.020 design standards under roof forms, I see that there are standards for clean energy installations for new construction. But shouldn't the town also spell out some standards and options for retrofitting existing structures? This should include protection of existing rooftop solar from encroachment by new construction or remodeling, some flexibility for altering existing roof pitch or even angles to accommodate better efficiency of solar installations, and perhaps some fee relief for installations in order to encourage rooftop solar. In sections 17.128.060 and 070, tree removal permits, where a tree is scheduled to be removed by a public utility, there should be a separate section. The homeowner has no say in the matter, and the utility does not necessarily operate in the manner the town requires. This leaves the property owner in a no-win situation. The town requiring a fee and an application, including an arborist report, which is a considerable expense, and the utility actually having the right to designate a tree for removal by law and not having a policy of producing arborist reports. This is why I say that this should have its own section. It is really out of the control of the property owner and should be a discussion between the utility and the town, with the property owner only peripherally involved. In section 17.164.030, home occupations, under letter B, what does incidental mean? Some high-end products I can actually exceed the price of a personal service some high-end products I can actually exceed the price of a personal service. Does incidental mean associated with the service or of a lesser value to the service? I would hope that it means associated with the service. I wonder why there is still the wording about product sales being produced or made on the premises rather than associated with the permitted use. It makes it unclear what the intent is. Thanks for the opportunity to see these changes, Pam.
Okay, thank you. Given that there are no other public comment, we'll go back to the ZDRB and see if there are any additional comments or questions or suggestions to the proposed changes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm curious, going back to the affordable housing and bonus units allowed, what's the basic process to determine what is an affordable unit? How does that figure into local rents?
It
That
is.
is just,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Sam.
Bob, you can go ahead
No.
if you'd like.
Oh, go ahead.
But we work through the Housing Authority of the City of Napa, and on an annual basis, they determine what the average rents are in the county, and they establish those by the different categories, and those are based on the number of occupants in a unit for those different categories. Very basic. I know Bob could go into more detail.
Well, would the developer be held to that standard for the life of the units, like those numbers of 35 to 50 years? Would that somehow be tracked and monitored, and would those units be rented at that level permanently? Otherwise, it seems like it'd be a bit of a giveaway for all these bonus units.
So yeah, so with our relationship with the Housing Authority, on an annual basis, they send surveys to property owners and tenants to make sure that those tenants qualify or continue to qualify for those units. If they income out of a unit, it needs to return to the affordable housing pool, and then they are tracked for the term of affordability, which under the new provisions before you tonight would be 45 and 55 years, which is up from the 30 in the current code to comply with the housing element.
And then ownership units have to be resold to subsequent buyers within that affordability range as well.
Does the affordability range change with consumer price index, or is it fixed one time and remain static?
I understand that it changes.
With the county median income level, as it goes up, so do the ranges.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, mostly a clarification on one of the design standard items, because the way it's worded sounded like a conflict to me, but I might be misinterpreting it. I probably am. It's the right at the beginning with reference to flag lots. There are two sentences. The first one within the standard says, new flag lots shall be prohibited within new development. And then the next sentence says, new flag lots may be permitted through design approval when the objectives of the town council or general plan are met, especially those for affordable housing.
What it's trying to say is that the standard is no new flag lots. However, there's an out, which is that design approval granted by the town council can grant new flag lots.
Okay.
Maybe we can take another, I see a tail. Maybe we can take another swing at that to make it clearer.
Yeah, that was all. It just, those two sentences felt like they were, you know, the second sentence didn't, the first sentence didn't set up the second sentence to be an out. I guess that was my observation.
Maybe we at least need a however or something to make that bridge.
Segue, yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably Stephen would agree with me that this Sandra and Daniel and staff and Bob and everybody did a huge lift in one, organizing all this in a sensible way, and then bringing items to us that they felt were confusing or complicated. So obviously not everything got changed in the code, but just clarifications, things that were sticky, things that weren't working. So I think it's turned out much easier to read and much better organized. That was a huge job.
I definitely completely agree. Yeah, the evolution of the structure of the document, not just the content itself. On that note, I was curious, just for both Member Cook and Vice Chair Miller, for things like, for elements of the design standards and the guidelines, it wasn't as easy to go through the marked up document to understand where it all came from. So I would say, just more broadly speaking, would you say that it was more of an organization effort, or were there significant changes to the standards of the guidelines? Because the slide that covered it was really more about the organization and not some of the items themselves. So I was just curious if you had more of an anecdotal voiceover on that.
I would, sorry. I would say that the content didn't necessarily change significantly, but rather got reworded in some cases to add clarification. The structure of that section and changing it to a table makes it a lot more legible, a lot more consolidated. As a design professional, I feel like it's much more useful. I think as a board member, it will be easier for those of us that sit on the ZDRB to review projects and track them according to that table. Would you say you agree, Kim?
I do, 100%, because there were different design standards for different districts, and the staff found a way to put them all together. There's one or two highlights out for the historic district, but otherwise we now have one set of design standards to go for all the districts, and so it simplifies it. It was a lot of wordsmithing and creativity about how we can say what we want for objective standards and say what we want for subjective standards, but it didn't change drastically other than trying to say it as clearly as possible.
Thank you for the clarification. That makes a lot of sense. And having gone through a number of design reviews, we may find that the clarification and the wording, if it conflicts with the proposed design, there's always room to look back on whether or not the wording was the right one in context. So whereas in the past the wording might have been so obscure or so buried, we may not have been able to reference anything at all. So it makes sense that it puts us in a better path to continually evolve appropriately the design guidelines and standards in a way that benefits both the applicants and the town.
I agree.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Any other feedback, comments, or changes from the board? And then back to staff. Are there any new public comments that came through since the session began?
No, there haven't.
Okay. Well, that brings us to any final comments. So as Sandra pointed out, there will be a next steps section after this to remind us of what's afterwards. But at this point, are there any other final comments, questions, discussion before anyone wants to make a motion? It doesn't sound like there is. And with that, I will offer up for anyone who would like to make a motion to the board at this time. I will take the lead. And given, I mean, this, you know, the spirit of collaboration between the board and the council, the open discussion here, the expertise of Bob and the steady hand of the staff, to me, it's, and all the time and effort put into it is just really truly a highlight of the process. So, you know, with that in mind, I'll make a motion to accept the proposals as written so that it can get presented to the town council in this first phase.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, then the motion passes. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to the final agenda item, which is next steps. If there are any additional ones you wanted to highlight.
So I've lost those dates, but I do believe that we will be taking this to the council on July 20th, and that is simply because the first meeting in July is canceled, which means we'll be bringing you phase 2 before the council sees your recommendations here. And then after your phase 2 recommendations, they will go to the council on August 3rd, and our goal is to adopt the complete code by September 7th, and that'll be just 2 months shy of a 2-year effort, or no, 1-year effort, and it will be really satisfying, I think. I know from staff level, we're just so satisfied with the changes that we're seeing made. And, you know, to echo what I've heard earlier, we're so appreciative to you, Vice Chair Miller, and Member Cook for participating and just for your feedback tonight. So kudos to everyone for this effort, and we'll have one more session next meeting.
Great. So with that positive momentum, I will go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And the Tuesday, June 8th, 2021 meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Kudos to you.
Bye.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.